This is what happens when the empath becomes emotionally untouchable. Have you ever cared so deeply that it left you empty? Have you ever been the one who gives, understands, forgives until one day you stop? That's not coldness, that's clarity. Because when the empath becomes emotionally untouchable, everything changes. There's a moment every deeply feeling person reaches. That quiet click inside where something shifts. It's not that you stop caring. It's that you stop bleeding for people who only ever took your pulse to make sure you were still available to fix them. You used to absorb the energy in the room, interpret every silence, and soften your edges just to make others comfortable. But then you realized being the healer shouldn't come at the cost of your own wounds never closing. When the empath becomes emotionally untouchable, it's not because they built walls. It's because they finally built standards. They still love deeply. They still feel completely. But now they do it from a place of strength, not sacrifice. And that's when everything shifts. People who once took advantage of your softness start calling you different. No, you're not different. You're done confusing self-abandonment with love, done over-explaining your worth, done apologizing for boundaries that keep you sane. Being emotionally untouchable isn't about being unreachable. It's about being unshakable. You've learned how to feel without folding, to care without carrying. And in that transformation, the empath doesn't lose their heart. They finally learn how to protect it. You can care deeply without losing yourself. That's the quiet revelation that comes after years of being the one who feels everything a little too much. When you're the empath, you're used to being the emotional anchor for everyone else, the listener, the fixer, the one who absorbs storms and still smiles through the thunder. You sense tension before it's spoken. You feel pain that isn't yours. You step in not because anyone asked, but because you can't stand to watch someone drown when you know you can swim. But the truth is, sometimes while saving others, you forget you're holding your breath underwater too. There's a fine line between compassion and collapse. When you cross it too many times, you begin to confuse exhaustion for empathy. You think being kind means being endlessly available. You tell yourself that your ability to understand everyone's emotions is your strength, and it is, until it starts to deplete you. Because empathy, when unchecked, can quietly turn into self-erasure. You stop asking what you need. You start saying it's okay when it's not. You carry weights that don't belong to you because you're afraid that if you don't, someone else will fall apart. But here's what no one tells you. Compassion is not about taking on everyone's burden. It's about seeing them, not saving them. True compassion is rooted in strength, not sacrifice. It's standing beside someone in their pain without making their pain your identity. You can still hold space for others while keeping your center intact. You can listen deeply and still know when to say, I can't hold this one for you. That's not selfishness, that's sustainability, because love that constantly drains you isn't noble. It's toxic dressed as devotion. When you start to understand this, everything changes. You begin to recognize how often you've mistaken overgiving for connection. You notice the way you've internalized guilt for simply needing rest. You start to see that you've been confusing empathy with emotional labor that nobody asked you to do. You were taught that caring means carrying. And now you're learning that real care sometimes looks like letting people carry their own lessons. The moment you decide that your peace matters just as much as your kindness, your relationships start to shift. Some people will resist it, not because you've changed, but because your new boundaries expose how one-sided things were. The people who valued your emotional availability more than your well-being will call you distant, but you'll know the truth. You're not becoming less loving, you're becoming less lost. Caring without losing yourself means learning to pause before you absorb, to ask, is this mine to fix? To breathe before reacting, to listen without rescuing, to empathize without internalizing. It means understanding that sometimes people need to face their discomfort, and stepping in too quickly robs them of the growth that comes from struggle. The most loving thing you can do for someone is not always to make it easier. Sometimes it's to hold your ground while they find their own. This shift doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. You start realizing that love rooted in guilt isn't love at all. You learn to give from overflow, not emptiness. You learn to support without surrendering yourself in the process. It's not that you stop caring. It's that you care differently, more intentionally, more selectively. You begin to understand that your empathy is a gift, not a currency to earn acceptance or prove worth. When compassion stops coming from a place of depletion and starts coming from balance, it becomes infinitely more powerful. You no longer feel resentful or invisible. You no longer see empathy as a burden, but as a choice, one that you can offer freely, knowing you won't disappear in the process. That's the beauty of compassion without collapse. It's love that sustains both the giver and the receiver. Setting limits isn't rejection, it's self-respect. For a long time, it can feel uncomfortable, even painful, to draw a line between what you give and what you allow. Especially when you're someone who naturally puts others first. You might feel guilty for saying no, worried that boundaries make you seem cold or unkind. You might even convince yourself that real love means being endlessly available, always saying yes, always being the one who understands, forgives, and adjusts. But what you eventually learn is that love without limits becomes a slow kind of self-betrayal. Every time you silence your discomfort to make someone else comfortable, you teach them that your needs are negotiable and their behavior has no consequence. Boundaries are not walls, they're doors with locks. They let the right people in while keeping the wrong energies out. They are not there to punish others, but to protect your peace, your energy, and your identity. Without them, relationships become blurry, uneven, and draining. You start giving more than you receive, speaking less than you feel, and carrying emotional weight that isn't yours. Boundaries remind both you and others that your heart is valuable, not a public space for anyone to enter, rearrange, or damage as they please. When you first start setting boundaries, it's rarely easy. The people who benefited from your lack of them will resist. They'll say you've changed, that you're distant, that you're no longer the same. But what they really mean is that your self-respect now inconveniences their comfort. And that's okay. Growth often offends those who are comfortable with your smaller version. You're not here to make everyone understand your limits. You're here to honor them regardless. Boundaries teach others how to treat you, but more importantly, they teach you how to treat yourself. When you consistently enforce your limits, you build trust with yourself. You start believing that you'll protect your peace even when it's uncomfortable to do so. That's what real self-worth looks like. Not loud confidence, but quiet consistency. Every no you speak from a place of self-respect becomes a declaration. My time, energy, and emotions matter. You stop chasing validation and start cultivating balance. People often confuse boundaries with distance, but the truth is, boundaries are what make real closeness possible. Without them, connection becomes contaminated by resentment. You can't truly love someone when you're secretly drained by them. You can't be present for others when you're constantly recovering from how much of yourself you've given away. Healthy boundaries create the emotional oxygen needed for relationships to breathe. They allow you to give freely without feeling used, to help others without losing yourself in the process. Sometimes setting boundaries means having uncomfortable conversations. It means saying, I can't take that call right now, or I need space to think, or that doesn't work for me. Simple words, but heavy with meaning when you're used to pleasing. Each time you speak them, you're reclaiming a piece of your emotional autonomy. And yes, some people will walk away. But the ones who truly value you will adapt, respect, and stay. The right people are never lost through honesty. Only the wrong ones fall away when you start honoring yourself. Over time, boundaries stop feeling like rules and start feeling like freedom. You no longer over-explain your decisions or apologize for having needs. You stop feeling the urge to rescue everyone because you know your responsibility ends where their accountability begins. You realize that protecting your peace is not a betrayal. It's a necessity, because when your cup is empty, your love becomes obligation. But when your boundaries are firm, your love becomes a choice. In the end, boundaries are not about keeping people out. They're about keeping yourself intact. They're how you say, I love you and I love me too. They don't make you harder to reach. They make your presence healthier to experience. And that's the quiet power of self-respect. It doesn't make you untouchable. It makes you whole. Emotional sensitivity has often been misunderstood. People call it being too soft, too reactive, too fragile, as if feeling deeply is something to be ashamed of. But the truth is, sensitivity isn't weakness. It's a form of awareness. It's the ability to read between words, to to sense what isn't said, to feel the emotional temperature of a room before anyone speaks. It's an antenna for truth. The problem arises not from being sensitive, but from not knowing how to protect that sensitivity in a world that rewards detachment. When you haven't learned to manage it, your empathy turns into exhaustion. You absorb everyone else's moods. You take responsibility for problems that aren't yours, and you confuse compassion with overextension. But when you begin to own your sensitivity instead of apologizing for it, something changes. It becomes your greatest source of strength. Sensitivity allows you to connect in ways others can't. It helps you see what's beneath the surface, the fear behind the anger, the insecurity behind the arrogance, the longing behind the indifference. You understand people not through logic, but through energy. That's not weakness, that's intuition. And intuition is power, quiet, instinctive, grounded power. It allows you to navigate relationships with awareness instead of assumption. But to harness it, you have to stop letting it be weaponized against you, because when people realize you're sensitive, they might use that awareness to manipulate you, to guilt you, to silence you, to keep you compliant. The moment you recognize this pattern, you begin the process of turning your sensitivity into strength. Strength doesn't mean becoming numb. It means feeling fully but responding wisely. It's the difference between reacting and understanding. When you were younger, you might have thought that feeling everything meant you had to fix everything. You rushed to soothe tension, to make peace, to carry emotional weight that wasn't yours. Now you're learning that awareness doesn't equal responsibility. You can sense pain without owning it. You can understand someone's behavior without excusing it. You can empathize without enabling. That's what true emotional strength looks like. Maintaining compassion without compromising your boundaries. When you start seeing your sensitivity as a strength, you stop trying to prove your toughness through emotional detachment. You realize that vulnerability and power can coexist. You no longer suppress your feelings to appear strong. Instead, you embrace them as data, as information guiding you toward what matters and what doesn't. Every emotion carries a message. Anger signals where boundaries were crossed. Sadness reveals where something valuable was lost. Anxiety hints at what needs safety. When you listen to these messages instead of judging them, your emotions become allies instead of enemies. Society often glorifies those who appear unaffected. The ones who can walk away, who seem unbothered, who keep everything bottled up behind a cool exterior. But those people often pay a hidden price. They lose depth, connection, authenticity. You, with your sensitivity, have the ability to experience life in high definition, to feel beauty in small details, to love fully, to create meaning from the mundane. That's a gift many people spend their lives trying to access. The goal isn't to stop feeling, it's to master the way you process what you feel. You learn to pause before you absorb, to check whether the emotion you're sensing belongs to you, to breathe before reacting. You start leading with emotional intelligence instead of emotional reactivity. Over time, your sensitivity evolves from something that once hurt you into something that empowers you. You start seeing patterns clearly, reading intentions effortlessly, and choosing your energy wisely. You no longer drown in emotion, you surf it. You can walk into chaos and stay centered, not because you're hardened, but because you've learned how to manage the current instead of getting pulled under by it. Sensitivity becomes your compass, guiding you toward truth, toward authenticity, toward people who value emotional depth rather than exploit it. And when that shift happens, you no longer wish to be less sensitive. You realize that your heart's capacity to feel deeply is not your vulnerability. It's your greatest form of resilience. Learning to detach from drama doesn't make you heartless. It means you finally understand that peace is more valuable than proving a point. Detachment isn't indifference, it's clarity. It's the calm that comes when you stop reacting to every emotional wave around you and start observing from the shore. For most of your life, you might have believed that caring means being involved, that love means being affected, that to be close to someone you have to carry their emotions as your own. But emotional maturity teaches you that there's a difference between empathy and entanglement. Detachment is what allows you to love someone without losing yourself in their chaos. When you're attached to an outcome, a person, or a story, your emotions become dependent on forces outside of your control. You rise and fall with every change in someone else's mood. Their silence becomes your insecurity. Their distance becomes your self-doubt. You start interpreting their behavior as a reflection of your worth. That's when life starts to feel heavy, because you're constantly trying to manage what was never yours to control. Detachment liberates you from that. It's not that you stop feeling, it's that you stop fusing. You give people the space to be who they are, while giving yourself the space to stay grounded in who you are. When you begin to practice detachment, you start seeing things as they are, not as you wish them to be. You no longer chase validation or overanalyze silence. You stop trying to convince people of your value because you finally recognize it within yourself. Detachment brings perspective. It lets you respond instead of react, to choose calm instead of chaos. It's the art of staying soft in heart while strong in mind. You can listen to someone's pain without making it your own. You can witness conflict without absorbing its tension. You can care deeply but remain steady even when things around you are unstable. Detachment is especially powerful for empaths because it's the boundary that allows compassion to survive. Without it, empathy turns into emotional exhaustion. You start confusing helping with fixing, support with saving, love with self-sacrifice. But when you learn to detach, you realize that not every storm requires your presence, and not every problem needs your energy. Some things resolve themselves when you simply stop feeding them attention. The more you practice this, the more you understand that peace is not passive. It's a choice that requires discipline. You train yourself to step back instead of stepping in, to breathe instead of break, to observe instead of absorb. People might misunderstand your detachment at first. They'll think you've stopped caring, that you've become distant or aloof. But what they don't see is that your detachment is what allows you to love with clarity instead of confusion. You're no longer tangled in other people's projections. You can see their patterns without getting pulled into them. You can witness their behavior without personalizing it. That's not coldness, that's emotional wisdom. You've learned that love doesn't have to mean losing balance. You can hold space for others while staying firmly rooted in your own peace. There's a quiet confidence that comes with detachment. You no longer chase what disturbs your spirit. You stop arguing to be understood and start valuing your inner stillness more than being right. You no longer feel the need to control outcomes because you trust yourself to handle whatever unfolds. Detachment doesn't distance you from life. It deepens your connection to it. When you're not consumed by drama or anxiety, you notice beauty more easily, you listen more intently, and you engage more authentically. You start realizing that everything you were trying to hold on to so tightly was never meant to be controlled. It was meant to be experienced. And once you stop clinging, life begins to flow. That's when peace stops being something you chase and becomes something you embody. Real connection doesn't come from needing someone, it comes from choosing them while standing firmly on your own. Emotional independence is not about isolation or disconnection, it's about learning to be whole before you join with another person. It's the quiet confidence that says, I want you, but I don't need you to survive. When you reach that place, your relationships shift from dependence to depth. You stop using people to fill your emptiness and you start sharing from a place of fullness. You stop clinging out of fear and you begin connecting out of freedom. Many people mistake attachment for love. They think love means constant reassurance, constant validation, constant presence. They believe if someone doesn't respond right away or meet every emotional need, something is wrong. But true emotional independence challenges that belief. It says, my peace doesn't depend on how someone else shows up today. It's not that you stop caring or expecting healthy reciprocity. It's that you stop outsourcing your stability. You stop expecting another person to do the emotional work that only you can do for yourself. When you're emotionally independent, you still feel deeply. You still want connection, intimacy, affection, but you no longer confuse them with identity. You know who you are outside of any relationship. You don't crumble when someone leaves because you no longer rely on them to define your worth. You've learned how to comfort yourself, how to regulate your own emotions, how to find stillness in solitude, you begin to realize that loneliness and aloneness are not the same thing. Loneliness is the absence of others. Aloneness is the presence of yourself. When you make peace with your own company, you stop accepting chaos just to avoid silence. Emotional independence also transforms the way you give love. You stop giving from fear of being abandoned, fear of not being enough, and start giving from authenticity. You no longer perform affection in hopes of being loved in return. You offer it because it's who you are, not because you expect a reward. This makes your love more honest, more stable, and more attractive. People feel safe around someone who isn't clinging, who isn't projecting, who isn't using love as a tool of control or validation. They feel your energy as grounded, calm, and genuine. That's the kind of presence that draws in healthy connection naturally. It also means you stop trying to fix or save others as a way of feeling significant when you're emotionally dependent. You often measure your worth by how much others need you. You think being indispensable equals being loved. But that kind of dynamic only breeds imbalance and resentment. Emotional independence allows you to love without trying to rescue. You can witness someone's struggle without internalizing it. You can offer support without sacrificing yourself. You start to understand that people grow not because you carry them, but because you inspire them to stand on their own too. There's also power in the calm detachment that emotional independence brings. You no longer chase relationships that disturb your peace because you know peace is more valuable than attention. You no longer beg for clarity from people who thrive on confusion because you've learned how to create your own closure. You stop fearing endings because you trust your ability to begin again. When your happiness is not tied to anyone's presence, love becomes lighter, not desperate, but deliberate. You give without losing yourself and you receive without obligation. Emotional independence doesn't make love weaker, it makes it purer. It removes the pressure and performance from connection. It allows both people to show up as individuals, whole, balanced, and free, instead of halves trying to complete each other. It's the kind of love that says, I don't need you to make me happy, but my life is richer because you're in it. That is what it means to be emotionally untouchable. To love with an open heart while standing so firmly in your own strength that no loss, no rejection, and no silence can take that peace away. When the empath becomes emotionally untouchable, something extraordinary happens. Not a hardening, but a homecoming. You come back to yourself. You stop confusing love with sacrifice and peace with passivity. You realize that your softness was never the problem. It was your lack of boundaries that kept turning it into pain. You begin to see that being emotionally untouchable doesn't mean you feel less. It means you finally know how to protect what you feel. You no longer let the world dictate your worth. You no longer hand your peace over to people who haven't earned it. You stop proving, you stop chasing, and you start choosing. Choosing calm over chaos, self-respect over approval, and alignment over attachment. The empath who once absorbed everyone's emotions now radiates their own energy with quiet strength. And that shift doesn't make you colder, it makes you clearer. You still love deeply, but now you do it without losing your balance. You still care profoundly, but now it comes from abundance, not exhaustion. You've learned that you can be kind without being controlled, compassionate without being consumed, and strong without being closed off. This is not the end of your empathy. It's the evolution of it. It's where your sensitivity becomes your superpower instead of your downfall. It's where you stop trying to save everyone and start saving the parts of yourself that were waiting for you to choose them first. Because when you stand in that kind of power, gentle, grounded, and unshakable, you don't have to guard your heart anymore. You've learned how to guide it. So to every empath who's been told you feel too much, keep feeling. Just don't forget to feel for yourself too. Keep loving, but do it from fullness, not fear. And when people notice the change in you, when they say you've become different, just smile. You haven't become harder. You've become wiser. You've learned that protecting your peace is the highest form of self-love there is. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for being brave enough to grow. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. Your empathy is your gift, but your boundaries are your freedom. And when the two finally meet, you become untouchable, not because you've built walls, but because you've found your center. Thank you truly for your time, your openness, and your heart. Stay kind, stay grounded, and most importantly, stay true to yourself.